So I'd like to just invite my fellow speakers to the stage. So TB Dinesh, who runs Janastu and has done many years of fantastic work in kind of community archiving and computer science. He is also part of the W3C consortium, and that is actually going to be relevant to our discussions today. So I felt I need to mention that. I'd love to welcome Tanveer, who is the program manager for access to knowledge at the Center for Internet and Society, and works principally on Indian languages in Wikipedia under the remit of Wikisource. We also have with us Nishant, who is the technology officer at the Urvani Foundation and also runs Open City. And so a lot of our conversation today is going to be around the use of data and how we can use open data and open platforms to kind of empower ourselves as citizens. So I think one reason why we wanted to have this conversation was to possibly make people a bit more aware of the kind of potentialities of these things that we use a lot and have at our fingertips. So I have like a quick straw poll. How many people here use Wikipedia on a daily basis or on a regular basis? Okay, lots of hands, okay. And do all of you know that Wikipedia can be contributed to by anybody? Yes? How many people contribute to Wikipedia? Yay, 2. One of them is my student, so it's cheating. 3, that's not too bad. Yes, Rika, also, yes, brilliant. Thank you. But yes, so I think that in itself is a good point to start, because I think Wikipedia has become one of our principal knowledge sources, and especially in developing countries where it is, for example, there are some countries in Africa that access or can access Wikipedia Zero, which means that when you access Wikipedia, you don't have to pay for data. So it's available as a free resource. We also kind of find that there's a lot of evidence to show that in medical emergencies, one of the first places that people go to is Wikipedia, and therefore a lot of the medical profession are trying to include contributions to Wikipedia as legitimate forms of disseminating research. So just going back to the panel that we had just before this, that Wikipedia, it used to be that teachers were told don't use it in your assignment and all of that. And what we do now, I think most of us in the academic community do say that it's a good place to start. It is obviously shouldn't form the basis of your research, but it's definitely a good place to start. And I think one of the problems, though, especially working in the global south, is that language is a big problem, right? So Wikipedia in English obviously has the largest number of pages, but there are many other European languages in which Wikipedia is very well represented. But in India, we have a definite problem with contributions on Indian topics, Indian cities that are written by people who possibly have never been here. It's this kind of research by somebody sitting in the Midwest. And that obviously has to change, because as again in the last panel we were discussing that the lived experience, and especially talking about things like urban geography and knowledge systems kind of embedded in the city, are only kind of legitimately authentic if they're coming from people who live in those spaces. So I think I'll kind of start with Tanveer to talk a little bit about language and Wikipedia and how your work has been going in that area.
Thanks for that. I'm a little unsure as to how I should take this conversation forward because of 2 reasons. One is, all of you know about Wikipedia, so there's no point in going down that road. The other thing is, it's not easy to explain what Wikipedia does, because it's complex. And what one sees in the form of an article is just probably 1/3 or probably 1/5 of the effort that goes into it. So instead I'll do what I do best. I'll make some associations, I'll make some provocative remarks and see if that leads to a discussion, and probably some problem statements emerging out of it. So I'm going to make some simplistic but rather provocative arrangements and extended arguments. To begin with, let's say that truth is equal to knowledge. Let's just assume that truth is equal to knowledge. Please bear with me. If we consider that to be the case, then the question is also, is there a city truth? Is there an urban truth? And if there is an urban truth, then is the Wikipedia reflective of only urban truth? And if it is, and I think most of us agree, then there is a problem to it. Now that problem gets more and more complex when you take the question of language into it, when you take the question of access to it, when you put the question of the whole digital revolution that we're talking about it. So that's one thing that we need to be very, very clear about when we're talking about what Wikipedia is doing to our knowledge systems and how do we think of city narratives as knowledge. And the other provocative statement that I'm going to make is that if you think of knowledge ecology is equal to the development setup that we have been aware of or very comfortable talking about, the focus was on cities. Development had to be in cities. Infrastructure had to be a city-based one. But now the shift is also very visible. It's very palpable. It's very tactile. That we're talking about rural improvement. We are talking about rural development. So we should not let projects like Wikipedia also take that turn. It should not be that Wikipedia is talking about city knowledge and then suddenly all of us realize that, oh, but this is not the sum total of knowledge and we need to talk about rural knowledge. We need to talk about other forms of knowledge. And I think we are facing that danger very, very soon. We are already trying to address that problems. The problem gets addressed in many ways. One of the ways is the very rigorous form that was spoken in this panel of academia that Professor Gundu was talking about. What kind of academic writing should be channelized into Wikipedia? How does practices of creating knowledge assert itself as Wikipedia articles? Now the whole politics of knowledge is another discussion, probably we'll talk about it. But my point here is a very simple one, that it should not be an external force that forces us to think about how knowledge structures can inform what becomes narratives, what becomes policy structures, what becomes our takeaway from these kinds of sources of knowledge. The other thing that I wanted to mention right away before we get into serious discussion about city-based and open access is writing about city need not always be discursive, always be research-oriented. One of the fun part of writing that I read in Kannada was the flaneur writing, of how there used to be a charm about writing, particularly in Kannada. If you look at Nisar Ahmed's writing, if you look at Lankesh's pieces, and that's happening in English. There are people like Anita Nair, there are people like Zach Oya who are writing. In the Bombay scene, there are people like Naresh Fernandes. That's also very important writing, and we have not been concentrating on that kind of writing. So there are two ways that one writes about the city. One is the very citizen-aware, a very lament narrative. Oh, my city doesn't have this. Oh, my city is facing with all of these problems. And the other one is the commissioned, which is always the celebratory, which is always the nostalgic. I think, to use a term from the Indian academic school, Wikipedia is a way to find the Madhyama Marga, the Madhyama, of to say that while there were celebratory tones to our city and while there are lament narratives to the city, there must be something which will help us just understand what the city is now. And the final provocative statement that I'm going to make before I hand over is that we believe, and I firmly believe this, that Wikipedia is an intellectual exercise. Editing Wikipedia is not something that you do just like that. Editing Wikipedia is intellectual for the simple reason that you have to know what you're doing. You also engage in a fairly grounded conversation, a very academic, a very spirited discussion. By academic, I don't mean classroom. I mean the kind of academic discussions that happen on references, that happen on the legitimacy of a fact, that counters fake news, and all of these things. So editing Wikipedia is a very intellectual thing. Reading Wikipedia might not be. And it's a flaw the way that we also see Wikipedia, that Wikipedia is very, very easy to read, very easy to copy. Probably if Wikipedia would not have been so easy to copy and so easy to share, it might have brought in some other effects of rigor into it. But that's the distinction that I would like to make clear right away, that editing Wikipedia, adding to Wikipedia is an intellectual exercise. You need to know your facts. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to know your sources. You need to know your references. You need to know the hierarchy of references. You need to know the politics of your references. Probably reading Wikipedia isn't that. But that's not what Wikipedia is just about. There are other facets to it. And the way I tie all of this into the conversation of the urban is to go back to the development question that I started with. The gaps need not only be about what we don't know about the city. The gaps could as well be what do we know about the city that will inform us about understanding our city, about understanding the ecology of the city that we live in. And if any of these open access projects, and I speak about Wikipedia because I'm confident about that project. There are many, many things. The OpenStreetMap is a wonderful example of that. The MapStory team is doing an amazingly fantastic job of that. IIT Bombay, professor in IIT Bombay has been doing amazing map stories about the Bombay maps, both the historical and the current ones. I'm representing Wikipedia because I'm more comfortable talking about it. So I think I've provocated enough.
Is probably worth mentioning here is that when you write for Wikipedia, I don't know whether you're aware of what happens at the back end, but there is a lot of argumentation where you have to defend your writing. So it's a rhetorical exercise that you're engaging with other editors to demonstrate, and you have to defend each and every decision that you take as to what gets included in that final Wikipedia entry. So I think, as Tanveer very correctly said, there's definitely kind of a great intellectual rigor to being a Wikipedia editor. So we're hoping that this will kind of encourage more people to participate. But I think another really important thing that Tanveer mentioned is this idea of the kind of the hegemonic narrative, right? And the narrative, kind of most of our narratives about the city, about migration, about the way that we understand urban space is increasingly being found online, and in ways in which we kind of lend those kind of legitimacy is through citation. And there was a few years ago, there was a project at Wikipedia which was the idea of oral citation, because in India many of our knowledge systems and the way that we kind of disseminate knowledge is only in the sphere of the oral, right? And I think it's still an ongoing exercise trying to actually get the Wikipedia community, the larger Wikipedia community, to accept oral citations as kind of legitimate as a citation from a book or a printed piece of work. So I think on that note, maybe we could move to TB Dinesh, who's been working on the idea of this re-narration web, which allows for kind of other forms of knowledge to be represented, so not only the written, and of course accommodates other languages other than English. So Dinesh, thanks.
I want to also provoke it.
Difficult panel, everyone's provoking.
So what I want to provocate is the idea of script itself, since we are at the CityScripts. Right? So, and we had a nice panel before this, which brought in knowledge of the South and southernization of peer evaluation to academic writing to making, building up relevant knowledge spaces. And towards the end of the panel, we discussed about how the new generation is giving up on reading and writing. They're probably listening. But what's interesting is that there are billions of people who never do reading and writing, right? So this is an perspective where we were just in an intermediate space where forever, for long, we never did reading and writing. And then for about 500 years since the printing press, okay, we did some reading and writing. And then we tried very hard so that we can also read and write so that our, new generations will read. Now what's going on is that if that is the reason, why do you have to read and write? You just have to press a button and talk or record yourself, right? What does this do now? Right? It's available for everybody. Like not only Czech, but every tribal, every rural, right? What does it mean? We are in the new phase. The printing press effect is coming to an end, right? So are we ready for this? So how is technology now, AI, machine learning, all going to assist in this process? So if you start looking at this, then you start looking at what are these new spaces that need to be. What is a southern knowledge? What is our knowledge? Like, how many of you have a folk song recorded or read something about a rural context? But who's written it, right? So I just came back from this 250-kilometer Padayatra on the handmade, and during this North Karnataka walk, everybody who's been all their life, dealing with these non-academic but interesting spaces, or revisiting it and saying like, oh my God, I never understood this. Right? The more you open up to the thing, the more you understand on how knowledge spaces are created everywhere and how we are missing it, right? So you take the most famous folk song that you and I know, and there is 100 times more popular knowledge things that are going around in these communities, right? And numbers, it's huge, right? What is popular, what is, informing them and how it's delivered is the most significant thing, okay? So now, what can we do as academics? What can we do as people who are interested in bridging or constructing our narratives, our indigenous knowledge, right? And bringing a certain kind of equity in this space, right? So, so what I want to do is just talk about few of the things that we are doing, and one of the things is called Renarration Web. So what I'll do is I'll just switch the tab. Yeah, just switch the tab. Okay, the other one. Yeah. So this one is, I want to introduce you the idea of Renarration Web and how this is going to be maybe a bridge, right? So when internet came, when the web came, we all like, anybody can publish, anybody can, who's gonna, like, what's the significance of this? I can write and you don't need peer review, I can publish and it'll be out there as, some kind of content that's worth something. So now we are understanding how it works, right? And one effect, like a narrow thing, is the Wikipedia, where it is policed, it is, constructed, it is, has a form for every page. Right? So now, what I want to introduce to you is this idea of what might be most exciting in the next 25 years. Right? So, I don't know how many of you have realized, as soon as you take a book, you highlight, you annotate, but you're given up on the web. You go to any page, you never think, oh, where is my highlighter? Oh, I want to write something on the side. What happened? Is it Google who's programming us? Is it the internet? Is it the web architects? Who's doing this thing that we lost this in the process? Right? So when you bring this back, what are the possibilities? Okay. So the next standard that we are kind of holding on to as the most, as a nice thing to come about is called the web annotation. So I was part of the web annotation working group, and we just released a technical recommendation. What does that mean? Like HTML became a recommendation so that everybody can, as a standard use it and browsers can pull up. Now people can do on any page, annotate, highlight, okay. So suddenly all these thoughts go into like, what next, what next, what happens with it, right? So the simple way to look at it is I can keep my annotation, I can pass it to Padmini and she will open that page and see my annotation. Let's just stick to that, right? So if you look at that, then you'll see like how, like what Google did. Somebody can crawl, somebody can build some service, okay? So one thing that I will talk about here is, this is some old work, like 6-7 years ago. So I'll talk about something called the Raika Biocultural Protocol, just as an example, right? How many of you know Raika community in Rajasthan, camel herders, beautiful, right? So thousands of years they live with camels, they know, rare camels. But when a top-down decision is made, right, from the ministerial office to somebody, everybody else, they'll say like, they don't know anything, right? we need to do this so that they don't go into certain spaces, we need to protect that, So this idea of a protocol is to work with the community and see like how have we been living with the animals and the environment, and make them like a legal document which says this is what we have done. So once this document is there, imagine like such thousands of such documents, then nobody on the top can ignore. We'll have to refer to this and see what they're doing. Anyway, the point is that this is an example where you can see that something is written, it's very relevant for them. Like most of the academic work, you can go work with them, but they don't have any idea of what came about. Right? So now imagine that you have a web annotation framework. Right? So I can highlight something, I can write it in Kannada, or I can leave a voice message, or and then there would be a body of curators, something, right? So so what will come out is a possibility of alternate narratives coming out. Okay, like Professor Gundur said, right? So it's the style that's very important when you go out there. So there is a person called Daroji Irama. She just passed away couple of years, 1 year ago. She can narrate 5 stories, each of which has been recorded to be like 1,200 pages. Right? So how does she navigate? How does she keep this information? Right? And this kind of brings me back to tell you that maybe writing is just a way of memorizing. Right? It's like tagging something. You might have a little more descriptive way of tagging things. It's like, let me keep it here and come back to it, continue from there. Right? But how did Daroji Irama do it? Okay. So this comes back to like, when somebody asked her, she said it's spatial navigation. In her head, she goes through the towns and the villages and the forests and wherever, and she narrates. This is interesting because, like, if you're doing Google search, you are so limited by what words you use, and most of the things that you come back to you are from somewhere else. But you're happy, you got some results from the search, right? Now, if you have Alexa, you're even more happy. That, oh, she gave me exactly what I want, right? But in a space like this, right, if you don't know how to write, first of all, you shouldn't be happy because there is more interesting things happening in your neighborhood. That's probably what instigated you to search. But suddenly you are happy with what you got. Right? This is a very interesting thing. Right? But for Daroji Irama, it always be a proximal thing, spatial navigation. Where have you been? And it's probably representative of all of our communities. Right? I want to know something about this chair. Not just a chair, not just a black chair, not just, this is where the AI and the machine learning and everything comes into a space being a navigational thing, right? So now in this context, what I want to say is that there are 100 different narratives coming out of this, depending on who is the reader, right? It can be an abstract, it can be audio, it can be, a storytelling version of the thing. Suppose it's a minimum wage act, right? If you've been working with NGOs who've been handling this minimum wage act, delivery of it to their stakeholders, there's a lot of stories that need to be told, right? So all these variants. So re-narration is just like speaking. When you talk, you know who's next, who you're talking to, and the story, and then the narrative happens, right? So this is probably the future of the web, and this is how we should probably look at what are the knowledge spaces and what we can do with it, right? That said, I want to end what I'm saying by one way of doing this is maybe to have local village level repositories. If you look at any information in this sense that I described, most of it is not relevant to anybody else out there, except my village, my thing is very relevant to the village context, right? So where should all this information be, and who should be collecting it? How should be working on this? So we also are working on something called media maker spaces, where it's like a community radio environment, but the repository is local to the village. as an experiment to create indigenous archives, and then to collect all these things into spatial navigation and go forward. Okay. I'll leave it here so that we can come back to it through questions or something.
Thank you. So yes, I want to kind of pick up from where Dinesh ended, just to talk a little bit about also the ownership of knowledge on the web, right? So, I mean, of course, we're talking about open access, and there is this idea that open access is always good and everything should be free and open, etc. But there's also ethical concerns as to how much knowledge should be made accessible to communities to whom that knowledge does not apply. So I'll kind of substantiate this with an example. There's a website in Australia that was created by a Canadian academic called Mukurtu, which basically translates to a safekeeping space in Aboriginal languages. And the reason why they kind of made this resource was because, according to Aboriginal cultural protocols, there are only some forms of knowledge that are exclusive to their own community. So it's kind of sacred knowledge that they do not wish other communities to partake of. And as a consequence, it gives them the authority and the ownership to mediate what forms of knowledge about them as a community goes out into the public domain. So I think there's kind of, while of course a push towards kind of accessibility is always welcome, it needs to be done with an awareness of the fact that we, especially as academics, and I think you were talking, Gaviri, a little earlier about, when you're working in the field with a community, the fact that we are only kind of visitors there, and it is their knowledge that is kind of, that belongs to them, and therefore they have the right to legislate who accesses it. And I think something that like Alipi and the Renarration Web allows is for communities to be able to kind of take ownership of those archives, of those repositories, and then kind of mediate who they kind of allow in and out. So then kind of to move from this idea of, say, kind of qualitative data and thinking about kind of communities, etc., to talk a little bit more about, say, maybe quantitative data and its relationship with qualitative data when we talk about kind of cities and how we think about the city, right? So if you could, Nishant, say a little bit about, I mean, open city is probably quite familiar to people, but please just maybe kind of introduce what you do, and kind of what kind of potential it has for, say, people in Bangalore to define themselves in different ways in different communities, and maybe have a stake, kind of enact their stake that they have in those communities. Thanks.
I don't know how many people know about OpenCity. You said yes, know it. So it is a website, right? So how is it different? Okay, there are many websites that say data. We talk about different forms of data, and the thing about data is, what is data to you as a citizen? Like you say you live some part of the city, right? What data do you want? What data should you have access to? On the topic of common knowledge, right? What is the common data that you living in a location in the city should have common knowledge about? It's very interesting where when you talk about data in general to people in localities, they have a lot of expressions that come up with, like, what data with a question mark to an exclamation to other expression. Like, people don't understand what data is. It's very generic. So the thing that we sort of like, we've been doing this for a year. So in terms of Bangalore as a city is quite big. So it's sort of become a collection of towns per se. Right? People in one locality don't want to know about the other locality, and it's like that. It's a natural consequence of growth. The thing about people in each locality is they don't want to know about their locality, right? And sort of the question is sort of, where do I belong, right? In terms of services that are deliverable to you, say for example the city government, BBMP, right? So you are entitled to so many services from the city government. So as a citizen, do you know what you're entitled to? And if you know, then how do you access it, or where do I go? Right? Fundamental to all that is, where do I actually belong in what BBMP thinks I am? Right? So that kind of fundamental common knowledge is not available. right? So in Bangalore, the BBMP has carved it up into like so many wards and such, right? And then the water service will carve it up into a different section. By the time I figure out where do I belong in this agency, where do I belong in that agency, is like I'm like lost, right? I think that's sort of like we started off with that, and people really want to know about that stuff, right? That's if you say you want a service, say you have say property service or something, they would say okay, go to your local BBMP office. How many of you know where your BBMP office is? The data is it's not there. It's very difficult to find. So then again, so maybe we are sort of focusing on that kind of data. We have, if you can look at the site, if you have any data. So another thing about data is, in terms of a city data is, do we really know what exactly data should be there, or how much is out, or what data should be there, or that we can go and like say we just look at the local BBMP site and say okay, that's what is there is there. Should we really look at that attitude as okay, that's what all there is? So there is a lot of data. So I think our focus is more about looking. We have, that's why we also have like a fee request data, where people sort of request what kind of data you want, right? It could be a question or specific, or we're just looking at saying like what do people really want in terms of data. I think I'll just end with this and like get back to it later.
Yeah, and I think we also, I think we're moving from a kind of informal way of thinking about the city and space to kind of more formalized ways, right? And I guess like one of the most kind of prominent examples of that is Google Maps. And when you see, or when you think about, I mean, I'm sure many of you have had this experience that if you have a taxi driver, even if he's from Bangalore, which is also unusual because many of them are migrants, they will still ask people rather than follow the map. And I think that's because many of our kind of knowledges about the city is about kind of experiential knowledge, right? As opposed to kind of data. But I think the other thing that kind of Open City does, I mean, it's an aggregator of data and makes you aware of what is out there, as well as kind of looking for more data. But I think it also, I mean, I guess it makes us alert to the idea that data is not always fully representative. It might also tell certain narratives that might be misleading. And I think, when we're thinking about, say, smart cities and the whole conversation about smart cities and how data ready we are as cities. There are kind of serious questions there about kind of access, again, about who has access to contribute to that data as well, right? So, it's all very well to do kind of top-down data collection, but the representation of different communities in that data might not be kind of that visible. So I think we should open up to questions, because I think we have around 10 more minutes. Yeah. So yes. So if anyone in the audience has questions, please, or comments.
Very naive question.
Sure.
Dinesh, we were speaking of, regeneration and annotating whatever we read. So your page is going to get flooded with the annotations. I mean, do you as a user see only what you have put in, or whatever there is? Other people have also put in their comments or whatever. So I mean, your editors come in. Then if that is the case, then why should I annotate? It's my personal note. So how do you work your way around this?
Yeah. So the way you should think about it is, you are annotating for your own need, right? And nobody needs to see it, right? That's the first need, number one, right? Need number two, you are sending the annotation to somebody else and they need to see it. Need number three, you are doing it as a group, as an activity, as a collaborative thing. You are sharing it in a group repository, and then you have the group rules that will kick in. But when this happens, there is also a service. Like, nothing on the web is, everything is hosted somewhere. Your page is hosted somewhere. Without the permission of the host, who's, there is nothing you can change. You can't change that page. But you can subscribe to services. Let's say IIHS is, curating a lot of annotations. right? Some of them could be re-narration, some of them could be their own needs of commenting and review process that was discussed, right? So lot of it could be for their own need, for the institutional need. Some of them could be for public. So there will be different repositories which collect this and provide a service, right? And like this you should keep on building. And the last one is the public one, right? So if you know hypothesis, or if you know, there are a few annotation frameworks right now. But like if you do Google Docs, so if you are using Google Docs and annotating, you already know pretty much how it can work and how useful it can be. The only thing is that it's not exportable, it's not a standard, so somebody else opens it, they don't know what to do with this annotation unless you use the Google as the server, right? But if you want to generalize it for all web pages, what is it, right? So the last thing in this would be like the web browser itself will be changing to accommodate for these subscriptions. Like you subscribe to newspapers today. I mean, there's a new bill that comes out. Why are you reading it in the newspaper, not in the whole bill that came out? Whose narrative are you choosing? The left, the right, the Hindu, So this is what you're doing. Why are you listening to a particular TV channel or listening to something and not the other one? Why are you not listening to the Republic at all? These are the things that would come back here, and you get to subscribe to something. It's part of the browser. Until then, you will have a plugin that the browser will allow, so you can use the plugin, or you'll have an app. We already have one where if on the mobile you just use this extended browser, and then it will tell you there are other people's annotations. And in between this is you want to know your friend's annotation. Maybe it's just fun, right? So you choose like not just a subscription, but I also want to override it with my friends. So all this are possible, provided there is a standard which is understood by the people who crawl and make services for it. Okay. So the standard is the most important thing. That's why many annotation frameworks since the beginning of the web have failed, because each one is doing like Google or Alta Vista did it, somebody else did it, right? So as you can imagine, annotation is the first need, right? The first thing that you want is when you're reading, you want to kind of highlight, keep it, and go visit it, right? So hope you answer.
Talk about the technical part of it, but if you think about why annotations are necessary, there are some other projects that do this very well. One project is called IndianCine.ma. The way we describe IndianCine.ma is like you watch one of your favorite films with a commentary that's available for you to read. So it has a browser facility where you not only view your movie, but you also read commentary about it. Annotations, what are the relevant listings, if there are any other details, trivia, analysis, all of this. But taking it a little more abstract, annotation has always happened on web in the sense that it has never been successful. I'm the first one to acknowledge it. It's never been successful. Nor have we come up with a model that is going to also be, that can be easily replicated. But if you look at a Wikipedia page, and this is where I believe that Wikipedia is intellectual, that the article that you read is actually boring. It's something that you would probably get elsewhere. You might not get it in such a coherent form. You might not get it in one place, but you will get all of those information in bits and pieces. But if you look at the talk page, there's something called a talk page, a discussion page in every Wikipedia. That's where this kind of annotation happens. And not just annotation, it happens at a critical level. There's a critical inquiry about what is the topic that is being discussed and under what circumstances. So a lot of these biases that we operate under, particularly with the digital, while this is again another disclaimer, that what did digital do to our knowledge? It did two things. One was that it made it available, and the other thing was it also made it agile. Whether the agility is towards the good, has it raised the bar of knowledge, I wouldn't want to comment, but it also made it agile. So with the kind of digital informing practices of knowledge, there is also this question of what would you like to annotate and why? Not just what, the question of why becomes important. And one of the beautiful things about internet is you can experiment. You can write and keep it there. Nobody's going to come and say, "Hatao, isko leke jao." So the minute we start experimenting with the questions of why and the questions of how, rather than the questions of what and where, I think we are in for a far more better experience of learning, better experience of knowledge.
Tanveer,
Yeah.
how do we?
Just one second. I'll just comment on. What I was reminded was, since we're all academics here, the annotation, what it will bring back to kind of reduce the scare you have right now when you hear about, oh, what if somebody is modifying your contents, is bring back to a fine granularity the idea of provenance. You can follow the paths, right? Somebody annotated, somebody did that, right? So you can, right now, as academics even, or as IIHS or whoever, you get a lot of work done and you get it print out and it comes out as IIHS something, right? Who did what in this process, right? So that it's possible to bring that kind of fine granularity once this annotation is becomes a standard, right?
So how do you think we can get around the problems of the politics of moderation in Wikipedia?
I don't have an answer. Tenacity, perhaps. Because for a Wikipedian to have a complete article credited to them, I think it takes more than 3 years. Because the evolution of an article is not only at the level of the idea, it's also at the level of the concept itself or of that particular thing itself. Which means that if you're writing about, say, a political party, you don't just write about when the political party was established and who are the major spokesperson of the political party. You talk about the ideology, and then because it's digital, it's also very, very a place to contest. And hence the politics of moderation does not do justice to Wikipedia. I think it's more of curation. So yeah, but I completely acknowledge the fact that there is politics to it, and yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So I say that I've been a Wikipedian for what now, 9 years, and I don't think I have more than 23 articles to my credit. But that's the point. Yes, but that's the point, and that's the whole point of, and that's why I call it an intellectual exercise. Vis-a-vis compared to a blog, vis-a-vis compared to a website.
Hi, I'm Meera and I work with Nishant on OpenCity. So I just wanted to comment on annotation in this particular context and how it can be a pretty useful way of crowdsourcing, let's say, wisdom or context. So for example, we've used document cloud, which is meant for news organizations to annotate documents that they use in their stories. So here, in fact, some of the documents that we have, we've used, just embedded the document cloud version where you can annotate, let's say if it's an RTI response or some legal judgment, and you need to kind of add context, and we could have, experts and even citizens who understand the subject explaining what it actually means. Though right now it is still, I think, annotations are limited to text and qualitative information, but if there's a way to annotate structured information, I don't know of it, maybe there is, but it would be really cool. For example, like we have the tree audit, right? We have I think a few data sets which are just the list of trees, locations, etc., etc. It would be nice when yesterday they had this new rule about certain trees don't need permission to be cut. Can we go there and actually mark saying, oh, here's this tree audit, now with this new rule, these are the ones which are going to go. And immediately you have, it's not just a story, but look at it from an impact perspective and the understanding perspective. So people on that street will say, oh, okay, half our trees are going to go, or all our trees are going to go, right? So it helps you kind of understand the data much better. So I don't know if there are ways to annotate or add context to structured information that way, but that would be a really cool feature I'd like.
Hello? So, yeah, as far as annotation is concerned, it could be completely like an image, it could be video, it could be, all these are possible. It could be a 3D, you're annotating a polygon cloud something, or text or audio. But what is possible, because it's standard, is to develop services. If you are annotating something on an Excel sheet, or if you are annotating something on, you know, where the structure matters, there is an attribute and a value, right? Somebody understands, and there's a service that will come up that will do exactly what you want, right? So that's how you think about it. It's not so much that annotation itself need to allow for
everything.
For handling this particular function of what you want from the structure being annotated, but somebody will come up with a service, and probably already exists. All it requires is, as soon as there is a standard, there is an API which, you know, makes this bridge, and you get the results and you'll show it. Right? So
there's something called Wikidata, which is all about structured data.
Yeah.
So if you make one change in one central repository, the corresponding changes will happen in all the places where the data is reflected. So that might be something which you're referring to. But I'm sure it is not customized to the tree audit, but it shouldn't take a lot of effort to do that.
a typical
For
example.
example, the population of Sydney, if you have to just change it in one particular place, the central Wikidata structure, it gets updated across all the Wikipedias of the world. Earlier, one had to go and do it manually. You had to change the Kannada Wikipedia page, you had to change the Telugu Wikipedia page. Now, the Wikidata repository is written in such a way that the structured data operates across these projects.
Yeah, even simple example is when you have somebody born such and such a birth date, something, next to it will say 52 years. There is something happening, it's continuously computing and also putting out something, right? So,
Sorry, very interesting panel, and I'll set out at the first that I'm a bit of a Luddite and I'm going to show my age here. But a question for Tanveer and one for Dinesh. So the first, you mentioned Wikipedia, and I really think it has its uses, it has its place. But you mentioned the curation of knowledge. And there, do we make a distinction between knowledge and information? Because the example I'm going to give, quite different out of academia, but say Buddhist texts, for example, Buddhist philosophy, the idea that I want to read a root text and commentaries on it, which are in mediated subjectivities, but I want to know that I'm reading, I want to have that sense. So that's just a question for you, that I feel Wikipedia is one form amongst many other, it's great, but, and then a question to Dinesh about, I totally agree, why should we read and write? But in a way, this idea of data, and I say this in the context now, looking at the Indian state and where we are going, and particularly the oppression of the local to kind of start collecting and storing data, which in the end may not be useful for them. So I see your point, that if access to a digital space is going to give these communities a voice and perhaps, get into the narrative on whatever, the very important issues. On the other hand, one could argue, why do they need to have a local repository of data for something, let it be and let it go. So these questions, but very interesting panel, and I'm just a bit old-fashioned. And, I hate reading people's annotations even on my Kindle. I feel it's like an interruption. So maybe I'm sorry.
Should I go first? Would you like to? Okay. Again, I'm the first one to say that everything that's on Wikipedia is information, basically. One who wants to engage with it and adds a layer to it, it becomes knowledge. So this is something that absolutely is. And this is, again, this comes out like an apology because of the popularity of Wikipedia, that Wikipedia never ever claims to be primary source of knowledge. I mean, never. But the problem is that it's been used as primary source of knowledge, unfortunately, in the way our pedagogic practices have evolved. It's the equivalent of saying Bollywood movies teaches women empowerment or counter-terrorism tactics. It's that equation. It's seen as the easy metaphor. But yes, everything that's on Wikipedia, until you engage with it and you customize it, is information. And the other problem that comes with Wikipedia is the kind of politics that's involved. And I again should be the first one to acknowledge this, that it's not just a problem of how well or how badly the article is written. There's a whole problem of diversity. There's a whole problem of global south. There's a whole problem of question of representation that happens because of knowledge structures not being viable, of languages not being represented. And these are questions that nobody else is going to talk about because those are not their questions. The whole idea of writing an urban story, I think I made some points in that as well. We also mistake, this is again my easy associations, please bear with me here, that if city is to be equivalent to a place of learning or place of education, it also becomes in the same extension a place of learning. But should it also become in the same extension a place of knowledge? Because there is knowledge elsewhere as well. When do we break those points of entries that we have created? And Wikipedia does not say that what is documented in Bangalore is knowledge. What is documented when Bangalore was not Bangalore is still knowledge. It just needs that somebody else has to go and do it. Of course, machine learning is going to take up a lot of these challenges. There's going to be so much of structured data around us that I will not be surprised if tomorrow Kannada Wikipedia all of a sudden will have 1 lakh articles. Right now, it's around 22,000. And it's a horrible statistic to think of because there are 5.5 crore proud Kannadigas and we have 21,000 articles. It's a statistical, it's an appalling statistics to even begin at that. So, but if you look at these things of representation, of access, of the kind of knowledge that goes into Wikipedia, it's a question that one has to ask if we call ourselves a society of knowledge. And the big thing that, according to me, what Wikipedia is doing is, Wikipedia probably is one of those structures that is trying to fight, if not fight, at least to put up some kind of resistance between knowledge completely being equated with economy. So it's knowledge, but it's still free. It's knowledge, but it's still available for you to, the license under which Wikipedia content is distributed is free for people to modify, for people to engage, for people to recreate, for people to redistribute. So the easy equations that everybody else has been making about knowledge is equal to economy, knowledge is equal to power, knowledge is equal to currency, Wikipedia does have a position of resistance, and that's something that I'm extremely proud of the project that I engage with. And this is not just in English, this is also in Indian languages. I would like all of you to go take a look at the Wikipedias that all of our local languages have. Bangla has a very vibrant Wikipedia, Kannada has a Wikipedia, Tamil has a very vibrant Wikipedia, Marathi has an extremely vibrant Wikipedia and Wikisource projects. It's to these sites of knowledge that we need to patronize, that we need to go back to recurringly. Just as a reader is fine, because if there's something that you would like to contribute in this knowledge, I'm sure all of us will. But the fact that one has to land there, that one has to know that मराठी में विकिपीडिया है, हिंदी में विकिपीडिया में पढ़ सकते हैं, is somehow lost. Is it because of English? Is it because of digital? I'm not sure.
I think there was a tacit understanding of what knowledge was, what knowledge is, in what Tanveer, and maybe in what you're also asking. But where we come from, as a technical thing, I think half of what Tanveer said was coming from a very technical. As long as it's structured, it's knowledge, right? That's not how probably you thought of knowledge. I don't know what you meant by when you said information versus knowledge, right? But beyond this, when you look at how Google has been returning results and how happy you are with it, there's no structured information. It's hitting the point, right? Is it taking information and giving you knowledge? Like, what does it do? What was the process that it used? Like now with all these social, like contributions of rating, and Google became famous because of that, right? There is a ranking, and there is an underlying graph which tells Google like, okay, this is more relevant to this context than this. So that doesn't mean if there is database was, if the thing was structured, it would be much more useful. Until now, it's not been. But with machine learning and AI, it might be, right? But then, what are we using it? What are we using as drivers? What is the relevant data that will drive this, right? That's interesting because knowledge is power, but the powerful determine what knowledge is. So all the open data projects, beautiful, right? You want governments to put data out, You want NASA to put data out, you want the altitude information, weather information, something, and you want to do some magic, right? That's really interesting, and that's like the ultimate of knowledge. But what's missing in this is like what is not there. What if you didn't cover the whole of, you know, the community segment of interest? What if you left out all the street vendors? Or, you know, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. So, but everybody knows, okay, that we're going wrong. This is the research. This is showing this. We're very happy with the results, but we never ask what is missing in it, right? So knowledge in this sense is, you know, it brings up this new need to understand, right, and question as soon as there is a research result, to question like what's missing in this, right? Whose data did we use? You know, which department, right? How much of it came from who? So, and to answer like why local repositories, one thing we have to kind of foresee how much of information is coming out and where this can all be put, right? Like I already said, if there is a village, most of the information is relevant to that village, and there might be 100 people out there who might also be interested in this, and especially you would be interested for a different reason. But so where should all this be? Should it be on Google Cloud? Should it be on somewhere else, something else? And how expensive is it for the local person to get it from the cloud instead of almost it being almost free for the local need, right? It could be just a Wi-Fi mesh, it could be whatever, local network, right? And beyond that, all the things about privacy, whose information is, who's maintaining it, where is the community that created it, you know, whose knowledge is this, right? So all this becomes very interesting going forward, right? And how do we stitch them together, right? So if you do an ethnographic research from now on, you will be challenged by the raw material that's out there, and somebody else can challenge you, which was non-existent till now, right? And how many such repositories are possible, right? So you should now always be cautious on what you're going to say from the work that you do, because everybody can record, everybody can disseminate, you know, you don't know what's going on in the WhatsApp thing. So, yeah.
I'm just going to quickly add to what you're saying in response to Kaveri, that the other thing that I think is really important to remember is that the web is now our most visible historical archive. And you know, our notions of ideas of history are increasingly shaped by what we can find when we search, until we have a better alternative. So it's as necessary as possible to include as many and make visible as many forms of, you know, local knowledge, etc., to ensure that they are, you know, tagged well for those to also come up with other forms of knowledges to kind of lend parity or equity, I think, to those community knowledge systems, right? So, right. So I think we're running out of time. So thank you so much. Oh, yes, sure.
No, not anything particular. I have to make this point because that was one of the things that I mentioned today. That my objective of today's conversation was two things. One was to point out that there are significant gaps in the way that we understand knowledge ecology, particularly in vis-a-vis our understanding of urban setting of knowledge. So that's one. The second one is also challenge this notion of writing as the knowledge, that it need not always be writing. And when I say writing, I mean, I am casting the net quite wide. I mean the academic writing, I mean the journalistic writing, I mean the research writing. I also mean the Wikipedia writing. All of this is writing. But there are absolutely wonderful ways of making inclusive knowledge structures by probably tagging, by probably clicking images, by probably recording, by making sure that it ties up to the question of access that you have here, that if you look at the way Indic language Wikipedias are not on the Google search list or not on the priority of the Google search list, is for the simple reason that they have not been tagged. that the metadata is horrible. So if you would not want to sit and write an entire article, if you would just want to take a day out or take 10 minutes out and just give categories, just make sure that you put in the lat long position of a particular image, or just upload an image for free use, or probably redefine a category, or probably answer a simple question or fix a broken link. All of this is writing, all of this is creating knowledge, and this will go a long way in making all of our structures of knowledge inclusive, because it's not only on people who write, it's not only on people who produce, and I say this with the deepest respects. My father is an academician, but I truly believe that it's not only in the universities that knowledge gets published and disseminated. So an image, a lat long, a very, very simple way of putting up an audio clip of interesting talk, or a video of somebody is all writing. So is all, yeah, please. So last point.
How to answer.
I'll also,
And not just on Wikipedia, anywhere. Open access, please.
thanks Tanveer, so that we can close like this. My background is computer science, but for about 20 years I've been back here and looking at, but the last 6-7 years has been fascinating, because suddenly, everything interesting on the web and, these kind of discussions and the work that's going on will come from the developing world, because the rest of the 4 to 6 billion people, 5 billion people, are not going to be like today's 2 billion people who are literate, right? So this opens up enormous research interests and lot of possibilities for the directions that we can take forward, because the West doesn't understand. These are not their needs, right? Completely not. So, yeah. So.
Nishan should say something.
Yeah.
Completely.
No.
I feel horrible.
You should, yeah.
I think we are at the other end of the spectrum with our approach right now. So maybe we'll get there, we don't know, but we sort of see that based on observation, basically how it came about. Meera can talk more about how open city basically evolved as a need for citizen matters, because when you write about issues and stuff, there is again, you base it on some data and stuff. But what happened to the data after you write? Could you use the mic? Yeah, I think it's not, I think it's gone. Can I have another one? I think it's, it's a little fidgety. Yeah, can you hear me? So, I think coming back to how OpenCity evolved, I think, Meera, would you like to say about it? Shall I? Okay, so what about the data? There's so much data that was there, and we need to put it out some form other than writing, right? So that's important data that people have contributed to it, and it is there, and this kind of local knowledge which has come from communities over the years. Citizen Matters has been there for 10 years. So the connect with the local communities has evolved and stuff like that. So there are very important questions that come out, like the question of where do I belong and stuff like that. So we are sort of trying that. I'm coming to Mr. Dinesh, is where are the gaps? So only if you know what data is there available on your city, then you will understand what is not there. So we are still exploring what is there, right? So then we can get to what certain agencies should be giving you information, right? So now we are just taking everything on face value, right? So I'm still in the stage of saying what data is there, then we can say what data should be there, then we'll get to that. But our focus is more about local knowledge, where I think that is what a lot of people want, right? High-end data, the top level, top down is available. There is big data, but simple questions that people want to know in the local community. It is my street, okay, right? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Now you have a problem statement, right? So we are looking at that. So that's where we are in a different kind of a spectrum right now. So coming to that, so I think Meera's idea of annotation is how you connect this local community to small data, right? Instead of just big data. So how can they annotate and like how can they contribute to that small data, which most people are interested in small data around them. Yeah.
Yeah. Even the small print, like we don't know what's missing in this, but based on
A lot of assumptions
such
made.
thing, this is a derivation. Right?
Especially if our focus is the city and the city knowledge and data with respect to the city. So when we in our cities itself, we are like lot of assumptions made about what data is, and every locality is like Bangalore is just an example is different, right? So the needs and perceptions of everything like with respect to data is different. So it's again an exploration. That's why you want people to actually contribute. You're like, well, I've been looking at what kind of questions people come up with. It's like really weird. People want some simple things to like find me like something really great. So let people engage and we'll see.
Having it is a very community focused sort of collaboration. Right?
Yeah.
Every month we have community days where people just get together and open it. Same kind of model on the Wikipedia days and the events, right?
So we're having one tomorrow, so we'll see what happens.
So yes, so please go along if you are interested. So I think we should wrap up there. So thank you everyone and thank you.